David, thanks for coming on. How you doing today?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic, man. I think we're all getting the wheels turning for some 49er football. And I want to start with what Steve Wilks was talking about right there, his defensive line, and the article you wrote for The Athletic on Nick Bosa showing up to camp and aiming for a new contract extension. What have you seen from Nick Bosa, and was there any doubt on whether or not he was going to show up to mandatory minicamp?
No, there was never any doubt. Nothing has gone awry in the contract negotiations, and we all know that Brian Arold, who is Nick Bosa's agent, is also Joey's agent. And the way that his deals have always worked is that he likes to leverage deadline pressure. I think John Lynch has indicated that he wished he would have had the deal done by now, but Bosa's going to get himself probably a better deal if he waits until the deadline pressure of training camp. And that's when Joey's deal happened with the Chargers in 2020. And I would expect that's when Nick's deal is going to happen with the 49ers here in 2023. So just wait until camp. That's when, the business dynamics of these kinds of things usually force them to happen. Nick, meanwhile, is just doing what he normally does. He works out in Florida, shows up for the mandatory portion of the offseason program. And when he does come for this mandatory portion of the offseason program, he usually just lifts, and he ends up watching the 49ers practice in his street clothes, and that's what happened today.
All right, and then he's going to leave. They're wrapping up day 2 on field. They got some few things on the schedule tomorrow, a barbecue, then they're gone. And they'll be gone like 7 weeks, and when they come back, it's going to be training camp. And over the next 7 weeks, what kind of progress can the 49ers make? So you mentioned, Nick's brother Joey. T.J. Watt has gotten a new contract, former Defensive Player of the Year with a sack record. I mean, the yardstick is the 3-time NFL Defensive Player of the Year, Aaron Donald. And Nick was asked about that. Do you want to get Aaron Donald money and the highest non-quarterback salary? And he said, I think I'll get what's fair. So which contract are you looking at as a comp? Because you're so good at the salary cap and working the numbers. Are we looking at his brother Joey, T.J. Watt, or will this go as high as Aaron Donald, do you think, David?
Ooh, sounds like we're having some technical difficulties real quick. That's how good your question was, Papa. He had to drop off real quick.
It's the Lamont Wade cell phone.
Yeah, exactly. We'll reconnect with David Lombardi in just a few seconds. But, Greg, it really is interesting looking at Nick Bosa showing up to camp. It's a great question of where he's going to get paid, whether or not it is like a guy like Aaron Donald, especially coming off that Defensive Player of the Year season. Greg, I believe we have David back.
David, you're back. How much of the question did you hear? Are we looking at T.J. Watt contract comp for Nick, his brother Joey, or the yardstick, which is Aaron Donald?
So T.J. Watt's at about, I think, $28 million per year. He's at the top of all the edge rushers with his average per year. And normally edge rushers are paid more than defensive tackles. And on average, that still is the case. But Aaron Donald broke the scale with his contract a couple years ago. He's at $31.6 million per year. So right now you've got all the top edge rushers. That includes Joey Bosa making more than all of the defensive tackles except for Aaron Donald, who's at $31.6. So we know that Nick is for sure going to break the edge rusher limit right now. That he's going to be more than T.J. Watt. And we, for a long time, even before the Aaron Donald contract was signed, we were talking about $30 million possibly for Nick Bosa. Then when Donald signed his deal after the Rams won the Super Bowl, it became a thing. Whoa, this is an outlier number. At least at the time, it was an outlier number, especially for defensive tackles. So now the talk is, will Bosa's contract not only be at the top of all the edge rushers, but will it also surpass Donald's to be the top paid defensive player in the league? And I think ever since Nick Bosa racked up the Defensive Player of the Year award last year, I think that's very realistic. I think that $31.6 million, when I projected his contract and I made my chart and everything, and I looked at the signing bonus and all that, I think the $31.7 million per year for Bosa is doable for the 49ers. And I think that it's something that might have to be done just because he is the Defensive Player of the Year. I think he's a better player than Aaron Donald now, who obviously regressed a bit there with some injuries last year with the Rams. But Bosa is Bosa, and Nick Bosa right now is the man, and he deserves to be paid as such.
Yeah, and to your point, David, coming off the season he had last year, he deserves to be one of the highest paid non-quarterbacks in the league. So I guess my question is, do you think the 49ers have any buyer regret for not giving him this contract extension prior to him winning Defensive Player of the Year?
No, I think that this is the way the 49ers do business. They're going to continue operating as such. I think that Bosa didn't mind waiting because he wanted to show what he had to earn a few extra $1 million. It was never a consideration, nor should it have been. There's still an extra year of team control, obviously, with that fifth-year option. So with Bosa, they waited to do it a little bit later than with Deebo Samuel, who didn't have that extra year of team control.
All right, Deebo was pretty outspoken yesterday about how awful he played, and he was sluggish. And this was after he had a contract year, and I think we'd all agree that he didn't play as well. And Brandon Ayuk had a huge year last year, and he's ready to take off this year. And I think, like last year, he maybe is the MVP of the offseason, the way he's performed. So we know Deebo's going to jump in salary appreciably coming up. The numbers are manageable for this coming year, but in 24, he jumps over $20 million. And the 49ers have time with Brandon Ayuk, David, but the talking point has been, because they did field some calls in the offseason as far as trading for Brandon Ayuk, and they shot that down. But is there going to be a point where Nick Bosa gets his money? Maybe you have to pick one of these quarterbacks. Maybe it's Brock Purdy, and that salary is going to jump appreciably. Can the 49ers afford, as you look at the cap for a few years down the road, to give Brandon Ayuk maybe a contract comparable to Deebo Samuel and have not one but two $20 million a year wide receivers on top of a $30 million a year edge rusher?
So the salary cap almost always grows year by year. That's the NFL's revenues go up, the salary cap gets bigger. Obviously, you factor inflation and all that into it, but still, teams theoretically, as the league sees success, teams theoretically should be able to increase their core of star players. And that's the wave that the 49ers are trying to ride. That's their team-building philosophy. We've seen their core of star players grow over the years as they've drafted and developed some of these players into stars. Bosa is going to be the next one to get his money. And, when I look at the 49ers and how they decide to build a team, I think they, I don't know if they actually do this with the same terminology that I'm about to use, but I think it's really, really clear that they classify guys as either A-listers, B-listers, C-listers, so on and so forth. And if you are an A-list star that the 49ers have either acquired through a trade like Christian McCaffrey or drafted and developed into such, they will pay and they will keep you. And the only A-list player so far that they haven't paid and kept has been DeForest Buckner, and that wasn't the player that this regime drafted. He came under the previous regime. Trent Baalke drafted him in 2016. But everybody else that has been an A-list star that's been acquired under this regime, they have made it a point to keep those players. The way they can afford it is because the cap does increase annually, and then they don't spend on the B-listers. When the B-listers and the C-listers, their contracts are up, the 49ers let those guys go, and they replenish those positions, the depth of the roster, with either draft capital, which is much cheaper on the salary cap, or through bargain bin deals in free agency. So to answer your question, this is going to be the determining year as to whether or not Brandon Ayuk falls into that A-list category. I think he's on trajectory for that. 1,000-yard year last year. He's looking awesome this season. And if, by the time the dust settles in 2023, if Brandon Ayuk is on that A-list for the 49ers, I do think that they absolutely have it within their plans, within their budget to pay him. It's just so important to continue being efficient through the draft. Because, listen, this year they had a 10 or 11 player draft class. It's only going to cost them like $2 million on the cap here in the off season. Not even that. And during the season, maybe a little bit more after the top 51 rule is no longer in effect. But that shows you how inexpensive it is to build through the draft when you're trying to fill out those depth spots. And when you can so efficiently fill out depth with your roster, then you could pay your A-listers the big money. And that's what the 49ers roster building philosophy is.
And now the 49ers will have a little bit of extra time to figure out what they're going to do with Brandon Ayuk moving forward after picking up his fifth-year option this year. But, David, I want to talk about someone who did not have their fifth-year option picked up, and that, of course, is Javon Kinlaw. I want to ask how big this offseason is for him, especially when you bring in Javon Hargrave.
Well, I mean, Javon Kinlaw, it's a contract year for him. I think you just have to look at it simply. And with Javon Hargrave on the team, Javon Kinlaw doesn't project to be a starter on this team anymore. I think, that could be a good thing for all parties involved, because what Javon Kinlaw really needs right now is a smooth landing spot to really integrate himself into a flow of a season and stay healthy. I mean, in past years, that's just been the issue with the knee. He had terrible luck, obviously, in 2020 with that severe knee injury against the Cowboys. And then they didn't really go and clean that up with an ACL reconstruction surgery until after he had played a few games in 2021. And then that rehab dragged through into 2022. So for the first time in his career, Javon Kinlaw is going to have a full NFL offseason that has started healthy, that hasn't started in the rehab room, right? So he's got to carry over that health into the regular season. And maybe the way to do it is to not have the pressure of being a first-string, 40-plus snap a game kind of guy. Maybe if he's a 15 to 25 snap guy as a rotational piece that doesn't have to bear the brunt of being a frontliner that Javon Hargrave is now going to be, maybe Javon Kinlaw is going to be in a much better spot to succeed. So that's what the 49ers are hoping. He's going to be a rotational guy this year. And I think that Chris Kacerek is excited because, again, this is the first offseason that he's entered fully healthy for the 49ers. It was 2020. They're not counting that because that was the COVID offseason. So they didn't see him until training camp there. So now it's finally a chance for the 49ers to actually work with a healthy Javon Kinlaw.
Coming into our chat, David, we heard from the new D.C. defensive coordinator Steve Wilks. I know Diamador Lenore hit the podium today, and he has been playing so well physically and covering. Trent Williams, another one of those A-listers, obviously trading for him and giving him the big contract. So they all spoke today. Final day of a 2-day mandatory mini camp. Just what happened today, David? What's the news?
Today, the biggest play of camp, and I think the most exciting one, it got the 49ers defensive sideline going. Trey Lance got overwhelmed by pressure immediately. I'm not really sure what happened on the protection, but Kerry Hyder was coming right up the middle and was right in Trey Lance's face. And Lance just panicked and for whatever reason just threw the ball right into Kerry Hyder's chest. And I mean, normally for a defensive lineman, those guys aren't trained to catch the football. You'd see that ball just kind of bounce off of them, especially at point-blank range. But somehow Kerry Hyder ate it up, gobbled up the football, then took and sprinted with it the other way and outran everybody for a pick six. And, I mean, it was just one of those big guy touchdowns. And there was a lot of good energy on the field today. Kyle Shanahan, I heard he was really happy. I was walking off the field and I heard Kyle Shanahan talking to the huddle there. He was really, really happy. And there are days when Kyle Shanahan is not happy with practice. Today was definitely not one of them. So it seemed to be a spirited day, a good ending. You can knock on wood. I'm not sure what the injury report's going to be. Sometimes there are some dings that you don't hear of right coming off the practice field. But it seems to me that these OTAs and this mini camp, as far as the health record went better, much better than previous seasons for the 49ers. So that's, I think, priority number one. This is just a setup for training camp. And now Kyle Shanahan has really emphasized the importance of the next 40 days or so. He knows the players are going to be away from the facility, and he knows that they need to apply whatever they've been taught here over OTAs and come back in shape, ready to go for training camp, because then the real competitions will begin.
Last few minutes here with David Lombardi from The Athletic on the UMA guest line, who's down at Levi Stadium for 49ers minicamp. And David, I can't believe we've gone 15 minutes without asking you a question about the quarterbacks. We know Kyle Shanahan gave a little bit of an update on Brock Purdy and his throwing program that he's going through right now, but I would love to hear your initial reaction to Trey Lance's improved mechanics and him and Sam Darnold splitting first-team reps with this 49er offense.
Well, we'll see if Trey can carry over the improved mechanics to live action, right? I mean, we've seen, I guess, a little bit of live action, but not really at OTA and minicamp. I mean, they're in shorts. Nobody can touch the quarterback, and it's just not the same thing. The pads are going to come on in training camp. That's going to add another layer of difficulty to, as far as when you're trying to take what you learned in the lab, which Trey Lance did with under Jeff Christensen, the quarterback's coach, and you're trying to port it into actual gameplay, you're going to be faced with these incrementally more difficult challenges. And the next challenge is going to be training camp, and then it's going to be preseason. So, what I've seen from Trey Lance so far, when I'm watching him throw against air or throw with shorts on, the release has been a little bit quicker. I also still have seen some inaccuracy. It's just going to be a long journey. And I feel a lot of people are trying to judge Trey Lance's accuracy by one throw here and one throw there. But the truth is that we're not going to be able to judge it with one throw here or one throw there. It's going to be something that needs to be judged on the aggregate. So it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And this is just the very first part of it, this offseason program. We're going to show back up here at the facility in 40 days, and we're going to start to write the meat of this story, right, with training camp and whatever happens beyond that.
Yeah, well, what he's got to apply, and there's no question, he's gripping the ball better, his base is better. Jeff Christensen did good work with him, but he's got to apply all that, and then it's got to be muscle memory, where a situation like you described earlier today, Kerry Hyder Jr., Boston protection comes through, you can't make that mistake. You can't throw the pick six, and I didn't see the video, but that doesn't sound good. So my question is, Brandon Allen is impressive, and I'm trying to learn more about him. He was the number 2 to a team that, went to the AFC title game and the Super Bowl the last couple of years in Joe Burrow in Cincinnati. Is Brandon Allen enough of a factor as we go to training camp where he eventually could be someone you don't want to cut, and he could be the third quarterback, and then you do revisit what we talked about leading up to the draft, and then, more you and I got into the post-June spreading of the salary cap hit if you traded Trey. But is Brandon Allen becoming enough of a factor where the 49ers would consider trading Trey Lance, David?
It's funny. You asked that today. I think you went 1 of 8, Brandon Allen. But
oh, he did?
I'm just kidding. Yeah, but
all right, scratch that. Put him on the practice squad.
I'm laughing at the timing because he hadn't thrown an incompletion yet in front of us until today. Anyway, I do think that Brandon Allen is more impressive than your typical number 4 QB. Normally you fill that spot up with a rookie because that's the best you can get. But Brandon Allen was the number 2 to Joe Burrow last year, so it's a really fair question. The thing, the 1 of 8, toss out all these stupid numbers that are coming out of OTAs. I typically start tracking it in training camp. I just read a tweet today. Even in training camp, you got to take these accuracy numbers with a big grain of salt. I think that the pedigree, the experience that Brandon Allen does bring to the table absolutely makes him a contender in that 49ers quarterback room. Obviously, he's further down the pecking order right now than these other guys. And obviously, we don't have a firm, prognosis on the exact return of Brock Purdy yet. It's becoming clearer and clearer as time goes by that the 49ers are very optimistic about a training camp return and week 1 availability. But until they're absolutely sure about that, I don't think they're going to be making any decisions. And I think that the overarching thought process that they're going to be continuing to invoke with this quarterback room is the more the merrier. And, I'm almost certain they're going to carry 3 on the 53-man roster. And then, 4 seems far-fetched, but you never know who they think they can, sneak to the practice squad and do this and that with. So I think that they're going to cross all these decision bridges when they have to, and that's not going to be until very close to the 53-man roster cut down.
Well, David, great stuff as always. We'll continue to follow your work at The Athletic, leading all the way up to training camp and the start of the 49ers season. Appreciate you taking a couple minutes out of your busy schedule to come on with me and Greg Papa today. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Perfect. There he is, David Lombardi from The Athletic.